Marissa, we're recording? Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today for the webinar, Communicating to Different Audiences and Demographics. Hannah Webster from Forum One is going to lead our discussion today. She's the Director of Strategic Communications at Forum One, which you'll all remember is the great communications firm that has been helping BBR get its message out. So Hannah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, Ivy, and we can get started. Let me share my slides. Everyone see my screen? Great. All right. Well, welcome to our webinar on communicating to different audiences and demographics. I'm happy to be here today. Before we start, I'll talk a little bit about Forum One. So some of you may know my colleagues, Melody and Nick, who are also on the line. They've been working with BBR now for, I believe, a little over a year, helping with communications and messaging and really getting the word out. So you can learn more about us on our website, but we do a lot in digital strategy, design, technology, data, and communications. And we've been happy to work with you all. So about me, my title has changed very recently, but I am a principal communication strategist here at Forum One. I've been doing comms work for about 15 years. A lot of my background is in PR, but recently I've been a lot more focused on the digital side. So that means things like content strategy, content design, writing for the web, those sorts of things. And that's really informed how I think about comms work as well. Because I think a lot of the lessons we get from that, it all comes together and really thinking about who the audience is, both writing to them and writing. These were the past webinars that we've done. You'll get these slides and be able to explore anything that you missed. So here's just past community practice pieces focused on communications and some best practices and communications planning, storytelling, all that good stuff. So today we are going to talk about communication to different audiences, and that's both how to figure out who they are, how to reach them, and how to talk to them. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about inclusivity and accessibility as well. Obviously, you want to make sure you're targeting the audiences that you want to be talking to, but you also want to make sure you're doing that in a way that feels inclusive and welcoming. And then I do want to leave some time at the end for questions, but we're also a really small group today. So if you have a question while go ahead and shout it out or drop it in the chat or whatever makes sense. And I will try and address things as they come, and maybe this can be a little more conversational. So the first step, which feels very self-explanatory, I think, to the people doing this kind of work, and maybe to everyone, is understanding your audience. That's who are they? What do they need? What are they trying to find? What are their key characteristics? What blockers might they experience to accessing your content or your messaging? Is that technology, language barriers, things like that? Understand where they are. Are they online? Is there a particular social media platform they use? Are different demographics of your audiences in different places? Do different channels have different audiences? One example of this that I remember is at one point I was working with a large nonprofit, and we were, because it's Forum One, working on redoing their website. And as we worked through the discovery and really talked to them a lot about their audiences, their key messages, what they wanted to convey, what they wanted to say with the site, it became very clear that the target audience for the website was a subset of the target audience for the organization. And that was because their primary donors weren't going to the website. Donors were obviously a huge audience, but they were getting the emails, they were getting print materials, they were communicating at in-person events. So the website was much more about who this organization was, what they were trying to do, their message, their brand, telling their story, rather than necessarily focused on the getting donations, and that really helped us target what the purpose of that channel needed to be. And so that's the kind of thing to keep in mind. Not all of your audience is everywhere. But understanding your audience is easier said than done. So how do you do that, right? That's, I think, an important question that we all work through. So it comes down a lot to data gathering and research, and that's going to look really different depending on what questions you have or are trying to answer and what information you need. So your competitor analysis is going to tell you what others in your field or industry are doing, how their work compares to your own, maybe what kind of engagement they're getting. Your data and analytics, this is your numbers, right? This is your open rates on your email campaigns, your social media metrics, web analytics, other tracking tools, even your attendance at events. That's going to tell you what your content, what information or content is getting the most traction. Critically, this is your numbers. So the data often will tell you what your audience is doing, but it won't always tell you what they are. And that's even more true now, especially in the web analytics space with Google Analytics, some more parameters and restrictions around the level of demographic data they can collect. So your analytics, their numbers are critical, but they're going to be much more about behavior than identity. So to get at that, who your audience is piece, you need some of that direct audience research, and that can be audience feedback and engagement. What are they saying to you? Any type of venue that allows them to give you direct feedback and input, whether you're soliciting it or whether they're just talking to you on social. Media monitoring, which is going to tell you what they're saying about you. There are tools out there, you probably know them, that will let you track mentions of your organization in the media or on social media platforms so that you see what that conversation looks like. And then the direct audience research, things like usability testing, focus groups, other types of surveys, other types of research, you're just talking directly to them. And what method you use there is going to depend on what information you're looking for, but sometimes asking those direct questions really is the best way to learn directly from them who they are and what they want. So once you have your research, you do want to break it down and identify who you're talking to. One good way to do that is to create personas, which will allow you to imagine a proxy for a certain audience demographic or audience member, and also allow you to differentiate between different perspectives and needs. And having some of a full back breakdown is helpful because people in the same demographic group are not always going to share the same behaviors, the same values. So you may need to think about where those differences are and how to address them. The flip side of that is then back to thinking about some of those behaviors and what they mean. So this is what we call a jobs to be done framework. We use this a lot in web development because our work tends to be very task oriented there. But I do think it can apply in communications more broadly because it's important to know what you're talking to, who you're talking to, but also what they're trying to do and why. So the flip side of the idea that people in different or in the same or similar demographic groups don't share all values and behaviors is that people in different demographics may have the same or similar information needs. And you'll want to think about how you're talking to them in different ways, but also giving them that information that they need. And lastly, in this section, one point I really like to make when I start talking about audience needs and communication is what you're trying to communicate is honestly just as important. Your audience needs are critical, but the other side of that is what do you want them to know? How do you talk to them in a way that best overlaps with what they're interested in? That business need piece is really, really important to name because when you don't, it's really easy for goals to become a conflated mixture of audience and business needs. And you really do want to differentiate and define what you're trying to do and what they need and find that intersection because that intersection is where all of the best communication strategies live. Next, tailored messaging. So as we talked about, you want to meet your audience where they are. So what are they looking for? What do they think about you? What are they going to be most responsive to? Identify those questions that you really want to be able to ask and answer about them so that you can develop your communications materials and campaigns around what those answers are. Another, just one example or one clear way of talking about channels is different audiences are in different places. This is Sprout Social's 2024 breakdown of social media demographics. As you can see, depending on who you're trying to reach, you may want to be in different places, probably with a different approach to the campaign. So you may have information that's really unique to your audience or organization that you want to get out, and you want to put that in different places, but different age groups are going to use social media platforms very differently. You have a very different strategy for older adults than if you're trying to reach Gen Z. And that's true of other demographics as well. But the social media and ages is always one of the most obvious and blatant things to look at, what those demographics look like. It's not the right way. All right. And then customize your tone. If you've done messaging work with Forum One team, with others, then you are probably really familiar with this. This is but when you're thinking about your messaging, you need to be thinking about both your audience and your brand. So this kind of goes back to what's that intersection between the audience need and the business need and what you're trying to convey. So what do they think about you? What do they know about you? What do you want them to know or think about you? And how do you want them to see you? So when you define this sort of this voice and tone, that will help you answer those questions and also customize your tone possibly to different audiences. Maybe you do want to be more conversational with Gen Z. Maybe there's a donor, again, with your donors, everything needs to be much more professional. So thinking about the tone you're using when you're talking to different audiences is really critical. And then center your message around what's important to each audience group. So as I mentioned before, different audiences may have very similar information needs, but may have a different focus. For example, like here, as I say, parents and teachers might both need to know the state's curriculum or testing requirements. They're going to have different questions. They're going to have a different focus. They might need the same thing, but they're going to need it in different ways. So might use different language to speak to them or different ways to reach out to them. And in addition to your message, adjust the call to action based on the specific needs of the audience. What do they need to do? So it's these two pieces again, right? What do they need to know and what are they trying to do? In some cases, you are going to have the same CTA for each audience. You want them to sign up for your newsletter. You want them to follow you on social media. But in others, they may have specific things they need to do depending on who they are. Fill out a form specific to their demographic, reach out to a specific person, communicate in a specific way. And lastly, for this section, understand the cultural context. This is, I think, especially true, I think, when you have a broad audience across a lot of demographics or across a lot of regions, but it can include visuals that you use in your communications materials, linguistic preferences, nonverbal communication if you're at a conference or giving a webinar or it's anywhere where they're looking at you and communicating with you directly. Hand signs can carry different meanings, different cultures. Visual symbols have unique meanings. Words can be used differently. One obvious example, I do a lot of work with the US, with the federal government. So if you're a US government agency, you're not going to use British English when you're talking to your constituents because they're not going to trust you or think you're legitimate. That really came to mind. I was working with an organization last year that was, again, a subset of a very large nonprofit, but they were based in India and used British English for everything and as they should have in that context, that makes sense. But think about it a lot. That made me really think about, okay, that is going to make them feel more trusted, make them feel more, because that's the context. One of my colleagues, or our colleagues, is a Spanish content strategist, and he likes to point out that you also don't want to be using really formal textbook Spanish when you're talking to an audience of primarily Mexican immigrants, because again, that's not the way to build trust with them, and they're not necessarily going to feel like you know them or are talking to them. So language translation absolutely matters, but cultural translation matters too. And that's, like I said, language as well as, but also nonverbal communication, idioms, slang used by particular groups. It's not just across languages and cultures, but also different regions or different demographics who may have different communication. And that brings us into the last piece. So I think there's some overlap here, but talking about inclusivity and accessibility and kind of what that looks like. So as you're working, do want to think about your messaging through a lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Sometimes you just see DEI. I know you see this in different ways. At Forum 1, we use DEIA, but different ways of talking about this. But that means a constant awareness of of how you're communicating with them and being willing to adjust as you learn new things about your audience, as you talk to new people. So this is always a work in progress, is in point of that. And then before you start creating your messaging, you do want to ask yourself, what does DEIA, or however you're defining it for your organization, mean for you? What do you mean by these terms? What the terms that you're using? How is that going to impact the way you talk to your audience? And what barriers might your different audiences have in accessing that, and really naming that and trying to find proactive solutions? So it's that question of, how do I ensure that I'm reflecting the diverse voices within the organization and community, that keeping that top of mind will help keep DEIA at the forefront of the communication that you're doing. Some practical tips then around what that may look like in practice when you're, especially in your writing. So there's obviously more than this. This is high level, but plain language. And there are some resources here for you that you'll get when you get the slides, but it's important to remember plain language is a strategic writing style. So you're communicating quickly and clearly. This is really critical for web content where it's again, very task oriented, and you're trying to meet people's goals, get them the information they need as quickly as possible. But it's important across the board when you're trying to make sure that you're understood. There will always be audiences for whom more complex content is appropriate. But when you're writing content that needs to be understood by a wider range of people, plain language should be the default that you work towards. And what plain language looks like in practice. So there's a few tips here. Again, you all are probably familiar with some of this, and we can get into more detail also, but high-level tips: avoid your jargon and acronyms. People may not know what those mean. It can feel a little bit exclusive when you don't. If you do use them, make sure you're providing definitions. Use active voice and small words for big ideas. That this helps make sure the writing is clear, concise, gets the point across. And then use your terms consistently so that you're using the same words for the same things, and people become familiar with the way you talk about your concepts. Use inclusive language. Oh, where did my slide go? Again, I'll have some resources here to look through, to think about, but the idea here is the words we use matter. And so you want to think about you want to avoid. And each organization is going to be different. So this does require an internal conversation around what you mean when you say inclusive language, what you want to avoid, what you're trying to convey with it. But again, it's something that I feel is, or in my experience, has been important to be, whatever your decision is, to be explicitly named so that you can talk about it and make intentional decisions. And lastly, in a very tactical guidance, think about your accessibility and your content structure. And I don't need to go through all of these necessarily. I'll give you the slides, but we talk a lot, again, on the website side about how to make sure that your content is physically accessible for audiences, for people with low vision or for people who are hard of hearing. How do you get them the information they need in a way that is equivalent to the information that others are getting? So on the web, this can mean some things like making sure you have really descriptive headings that can be picked up by a screen reader. It means making sure you have the right color contrast so that everything is really easy to see and differentiate. It means link text that is unique, again, so that the screen reader might know what it's looking for. It means captions or transcripts for videos. In print materials, obviously that's going to look a little different, but there still are some best practices, making sure URLs, if they're included at all, are simple enough that they can be remembered. Easy to read font, again, appropriate color contrast, enough margins, avoiding large blocks of text, down to what type of paper is recommended, so that there's no glare if you're looking at it through a magnifier. So there's some, again, very tactical, high-level accessibility guidelines there, but I did want to touch on some of that 508 compliance piece, because I think when you're talking about inclusivity and communications, it's really important to think about the actual physical access to some of those materials and what that can look like. And even though we started late, I did talk fast. So any questions anyone has, I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to pass on any other resources, anything anyone wants to talk about.
Well, I have one question. I guess
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is a struggle when you're starting to think about these sorts of communication campaigns is sort of, where do I start? So do you have recommendations on, like, as an organization or as a group, where you should start in thinking about these types of campaigns and et cetera?
Yes. And Melody or Nick, if you also want to jump in, you all are free to. But I think I would start with what you know now. So has there been research done in the past on your audiences? What are your analytics telling you? What kind of engagement are you getting on your social media now? Like that baseline to know what things look like is absolutely where I would start. And then from there, okay, this is what it looks like. What do you want it to look like? So you have a really clear, definitive goal for what you're trying to achieve. And then that will help you build towards that goal and understand maybe where some of the gaps are in what you're, like, what you have versus what you would like to have.
I have a question too.
Mhm.
So as we're thinking about where these campaigns fit in, is it necessary to have more of an overall outreach and communication strategy in place first? Or are these communication campaigns something that we can kind of experiment with ahead of time and then maybe go back and create a more formal plan?
That's a really good question, and one where I think you want to talk about the kind of what the ideal state might be versus what is actually doable. Ivy said she was into governance. That's something I talk about with clients. We talk about governance all the time, is like, okay, your dream state is one thing, but what do you have the ability and bandwidth and resources to actually do? So in an ideal world where you have infinite resources, I think you should have a larger communications campaign first, and things would flow from that, and everything would be nice and buttoned up, and you'd have this whole holistic vision. That's not always reality. So if that's not possible, but it is possible to get some of the information you need by doing those smaller campaigns, like don't let the lack of that stop you, I think would be my guidance. Like sometimes you have a question you need to answer, or you have information you need to get out, and that's the way to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So yes, both. But I think the smaller ones, if that's what can work, then that's what is the best idea.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any additional questions?
Sorry, I guess I have one more.
Yeah.
It's very relevant to me. How do you know when to stop? When something's not working, how do you know when to keep pushing or trying different strategies, or just kind of abandoning that one and realizing that it's not working for your population?
That's also a good question. And I think one that's very contextual. But what I think helps with that is having those really defined goals at the beginning. Like, what are you trying to do? What do they need? What do you want them to know? Because if you have that and it's just not happening, I mean, I don't know. I think it would depend on the campaign and what you're trying to get, what the cutoff is. But if you can have those metrics, if you can really measure success or progress or and see that it's not happening and there's something tangible there, I think that really helps make those decisions. Because when that stuff gets abstracted, it can be hard to make the argument. It can be hard to see what's happening. So the more tangible your goals can be and the more specific, like SMART goals, right? Are they time bound, actionable, measurable, all of that? Then that'll tell you if you're meeting the mark.
Great, thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, of course.
All right, if there aren't any questions, I'm just going to pop up a couple of reminders for the community of practice. Okay, so some upcoming webinars include the new Workforce Development Peer-to-Peer Roundtable, which takes place on November 13th. If anyone has questions, feel free to reach out to Jess Wilkinson on that. We're also going to have a seminar on November 19th, Diagnose the Situation Leadership Program with the Kansas Leadership Center. So anyone who participated in the Wichita meeting, we got a taste of the Kansas Leadership Center's trainings there, which was outstanding. Recurring meetings, just as a reminder, the Sustainability Mini COP will meet this Thursday. The Equity Mini COP meets on Wednesday, October 6th. I think that's probably November 6th. Somebody can confirm that's a Wednesday, November 6th. And then the Manufacturing Mini COP is on December 17th. That is all I have. Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing with us. And if folks don't have any other questions, we can wrap it up.
Great, thank you all.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.